Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Kel Revs, the chest of the best, the adventurer's best friend, where you can get everything you want for just your top half off. And tonight, we're talking shop. Specifically, episode 7 of the Magnus Protocol. Give and Take, so is the title, filed under Category 2RC 3338-0302 2016-1202 2024, notably taking place the exact same day as last episode. Not exactly a huge thing per se, not exactly something that would be important to the greater narrative, but I just thought it was kind of neat to mention. It seems, at the very least, that the filing system at the OIAR is at least much more put together compared to the archives. I forget exactly how the filing system worked back in the archives, but if I recall correctly, it was the last 3 digits of the year followed by the current date, I think, was the description that was Gertrude's filing system, and I remember that explicitly being called out as being incredibly inefficient and makes zero sense for when a statement is taken the exact same day as another one. But then again, that one had a specific purpose for why it was in such a disorganized state, Gertrude Robinson being a very, very clever spinster indeed, I guess. I hate to describe her as such. She is more than that, after all. But rather interesting that it should happen on the same day. And what an episode it should turn out to be. Give and Take ends up being a very, very, very interesting episode. Just in terms of the greater narrative as a whole. Whereas last episode, Introductions, gave us Needles, arguably probably going to be one of the fan favorites with regards to the fandom. In terms of characters, probably I expect people to become big fans of Needles. Maybe that's me projecting. I couldn't really say for certain whether that is going to be the case, but I certainly would not disagree with that outcome. Unless, something happens and Needles ends up doing something that makes me flip my decision on that. Though, in all honesty, they're already a pretty horrific character. They're probably going to be very consistent on that front. But we'll just have to see now, won't we? But without getting too distracted, without getting too distracted, let's just go ahead and jump into the analysis of the episode, shall we? So, it's happening the same day that Celia arrives on the job to work here at the Office of Incident Assessment and Response. The scene starts out with Alice showing how to submit a case for the first time, and Celia comments on the work, saying that, quote, "It's an old system, but it could have been worse. It's not like we're wrestling with tape recorders and manila folders." Yeah, I guess it could be worse, Celia. Alice comments on how Celia doesn't seem easily shaken by the contents of the things that she is experiencing via the incidents, and Celia responds that, she just doesn't get scared easily. She comments on how some of the cases get read out by the computer and asks if there's anything different about those ones. Now, Alice dismisses the idea, assumes that it's just random, but Celia expresses doubt, suggests maybe there are commonalities between the dictated ones. Alice says she's never noticed anything and mostly just doesn't waste time thinking about it. Wherein Celia asks if there's a way to look up specific files. She casually throws out examples such as cases about being buried alive, or meat, or whatever. And apparently there is a search bar, but apparently it just doesn't actually work. So if someone wanted to look for specific files, they'd have to do it manually. Of course, when Alice asks why Celia's asking about it, she just jokes about how she won't be able to really get a reliable resource in her research into Bigfoot, which Alice laughs off, and we get into the incident proper. In this case, file Cat 2RC 338-03022-2016 2024. It's dictated by Chester. Note, again, filed the same day as the last episode. Now, in this instance, we're dealing with an email of sorts. Now, the email is from one Diane Margolis to HR. Subject, resignation. It turns out that this Diane Margolis was a manager, and they are tendering their resignation from the Hilltop Centre branch of the Oxford People's Trust. They cite that over the past 6 months, they've received no support in spite of messages asking for intervention, culminating in some sort of incident, which they have detailed in a separate attachment. And then they go on to describe the events that occurred in said incident and the events leading up to that point in time. So they were appointed as a manager at the Hilltop Centre branch after their predecessor died of illness. They were offered the job by one Mr. C. Clayton of Oxford People's Trust, and they realized very quickly that Mr. Clayton wasn't going to provide any sort of oversight or support, including finding a replacement to fulfill her old role. She ended up having to seek out volunteers on her own. It was in late 2015 that she received a walk-in application. Now, as of sending the email, she apparently doesn't recall their name and seems to find difficulty, or rather, it has become impossible to find the relevant paperwork and emails, but they are absolutely positively certain that they had this walk-in application. Now, the interview was unimpressive. There was apparently no experience in charity work, no driving license, or any experience in retail, but due to the fact that she was shorthanded at the Hilltop Centre branch, she ended up having to hire them on probation, regardless of lack of experience. The only real qualifications that they claim to have was that they, quote, know Hilltop Centre better than anyone, end quote. Of course, they informed upper management, went through all the proper chains of command in order to make sure that this transition was as smooth as possible. However, the new volunteer, despite being very punctual, hardworking, and very positive, they apparently, as expected, struggled with the job, including taking inventory, stocking, till management, cleaning, just everything seemed to be just not support them as a very good employee and volunteer for the work. However, they did make a donation to the trust, which was, quote, a large false plant in a somewhat disconcerting ceramic pot modeled on a shouting human face, end quote. When questioned, I guess, about this donation, the volunteer simply said that he's having a good time working there, since it's all for a good cause. All for a good cause? Quote, all for a good cause. And then following up by saying that he has a friend who wanted to volunteer as well. Now, Diane expressed doubt about the work ethic of any friends of this particular person, but again, was short-staffed, and apparently Mr. Clayton, her superior, wasn't responding to messages anymore. The next volunteer arrived, a young woman, joined on, but demonstrated the exact same level of ability, but with the exact same level of enthusiasm. However, both of them would constantly laugh on the main floor, insisting that, their work was for a good cause. And it was funny to them for some reason. This woman also would make another donation as well, a large bearskin rug. And then she would also reveal that she has friends that also wish to volunteer. And Diane, still understaffed at this point in time, and with the Christmas holidays approaching, couldn't really say no. So 2 new volunteers join in as well, making more donations as well, a large chandelier of dark glass, an oversized gramophone with collections of religious plainsong records. Of course, Diane is thrown off by these extravagant donations, but the volunteers, again, insist that it's all for a good cause. All the while, Mr. Clayton was still unavailable. And then 4 more volunteers join on, Diane having to give them positions to fill out the roster, but she informs the first one that they aren't to take on anymore. And of course, all of them also donate. These donations consisting of crudely carved rocking horse, grandfather clock that leaked some sort of dark oil, heavily vandalized set of the Encyclopedia Britannica, and an extensive collection of abstract canvas artworks. Now, Diane apparently decided that these donations were not fit for sale and was very expressive on that front, outspoken, but these instructions were disregarded, and Diane started to realize that she was starting to lose control of the situation. And then one day, she came in to see that the hires had already opened up the shop despite not having any keys. She tries to find them, but the place is absolutely filled to the brim with new donations. None, she notes, fit for sale. She recalls a few: 2 large, soiled crinoline dresses, a chaise-longue with cushions filled with some sort of coarse sand, taxidermied vulture, rusty antique printing press, a collection of old medical equipment that had seemingly been recently used. All quotations around these, by the way. But the shop was over full. There was no getting around that fact. And then she finds the first volunteer surrounded by a bunch of young adults, the other volunteers, and a number of others that they didn't recognize. Well, she didn't recognize, excuse me. And of course, they all pipe up and say that they are all volunteers contributing to a good cause. All laughing, of course, that it's all for a good cause. And then more people enter the shop with more donations. A leather kite, an oddly curved brass telescope, wheelbarrow full of shifting fossils, an armload of swords, lengths of rope, all laughing, all saying it's for a good cause. And then more, just more donations fill the shop. I can't imagine how big it is, but she gets more. A tin bath filled with moldy food, stacks of old dental retainers, a brace of half-butchered pheasants, jars of pickled hands, diving suit filled with sawdust, broken picnic hamper, blood-stained china. It's just, if in case it wasn't clear that the variety and, I guess, discomfort of the nature regarding the nature of the donations isn't apparent, then yeah, it's a lot. It gets to a point where the shelving actually topples over and more items are still being wheeled in despite that. She even goes on to say in the email that apparently there wasn't even enough space to fall down. After a certain point, she starts to get buried by it and almost blacks out when suddenly gunshots ring out. The volunteers keep laughing, but Diane can hear them getting gunned down and even sees bits of blood spatter. Eventually, the shifting debris allows for her to escape via the fire exit, but as she's escaping, she starts to feel the heat of a fire growing in the shop. And as she escapes, a big gentleman, apparently holding a gun, gruffly pulls her out of the wreckage, throws her to the side, and demands to know who she is. And the only reason this gentleman, I guess ruffian really, decides to let her leave is because she can't really answer. She's just weeping and terrified and absolutely confused by the horror of everything that's happening. And that's enough. Dude heaves her over his shoulder and just carries her away from Hilltop Centre as the shop burns down. Now, in the email, she ends it by saying she has been made not to name the, quote, security firm that took action. She doesn't know who hired them, but knows that at the very least it wasn't her company, it wasn't the Oxford People's Trust. She was told that the fire is to be treated as an accident and should not be further investigated. Although she rather bitterly says that maybe Mr. Clayton should be informed, and if he would like to, he should totally start asking questions. End incident. We're gonna get back to that, don't you worry. But from there, we jump back into the OIAR where Celia exhales and seems to laugh. When Alice asks if she's alright, Celia says the voice surprised her. Remember, it's Chester that dictated this one. Chester being voiced by Jonathan Sim. No, sorry. Well, I mean, it's the same thing. Chester being voiced by Johnny Sims, who voices Jonathan Sims from the archives. Now, Alice says Chester's better than Norris, calling the latter a whiny little toad. Alice asks about the three voices, and, or Celia asks about the three voices, and Alice clarifies all of them. When Celia asks if Alice knows who voices, quote, Chester, Alice says no, asks why, and Celia says that she thought maybe she recognized it for a moment. Alice thinks maybe since the system was built in the 90s, maybe a radio guy voiced him and Celia heard them as a kid. But Celia hand waves it, says it doesn't matter. Quote, I'm sure it wasn't anyone important. At which point, it shifts on over to Sam's phone. Sam, it seems, is knocking on a door. There's the sound of rummaging, at which point Colin answers, opens the door gruffly, and Sam asks Colin if he knows a John. Apparently, Colin does not. Very certainly, he says that there is, in fact, no John within the department. But Sam insists that he got a weird email from John with a random name and an address. And he's certain that John is in the department because the email seems to be an internal one. Colin says if Sam is worried about an email, then the real stuff will freak him out. And ominously, an ominous portent of the future, for sure, especially when he follows up by saying that Sam will soon see. Sam kind of is, uncomfortable with this and asks if that's the reason why Colin's webcam is taped over. But Colin waves him off, and Sam, understanding that this is the point in time where he should probably just, leave, decides to pull out his phone and show Colin, hey, all right, fine, but if you get something from this email address, please let me know. But Colin obviously gets super angry about this, telling him to put his phone away and to look at the sign that says no external electronics. His, paranoia coming out in full force at this point. Sam starts to go, but Colin makes to grab the phone, noting that it's already started recording, and then there is a brief struggle between the two, which, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, depending on how you want to interpret it, gets cut off as we shift on over to the last scene of the episode, Lena's office. And finally, after a good bit of mystery, Gwen enters the scene and finally addresses the contents of the email she had received. In the sense that she straight up confronts Lena about it. Continuing from last time, Lena is seen in the video talking to a man begging for his life, and it's revealed that this man's name is Klaus. Or Klaus? Klaus. I don't know. I forget the pronunciation. You'll have to forgive me. Klaus says he's sorry, and then we hear sounds of a struggle, followed by footsteps and a gunshot, ending with Lena cursing, and apparently the video ends at that point. In other words, at this point in time, it becomes clear, as Gwen explains, that the video is not just one of Lena attempting to kill someone. It is something she failed to do. In other words, Klaus is currently still at large, missing and somewhere in the world. Lena, of course, is not, it's hard to say. She doesn't seem surprised, but she does note that it's incredibly stupid of Gwen to come to her with this video. Just straight up confront her with no real tangible end goal to be conceived of, at least. But we'll get into that. Gwen notes that whoever Lena's bosses are, they would probably reward Gwen with Lena's position due to her negligence and incompetence at tying up a loose end, plugging up a leak, things such as that. She gives away that she has a source that has confirmed with her that everyone seems to think that this man is dead. So it would stand to reason that Lena has covered up her blunder. And at long last, we see that this is Gwen's goal here. But at the same time, we see that Gwen is, she's straight up blackmailing Lena. There's no getting around it. She's blackmailing Lena. Like, the question is, why didn't she go ahead and go to Lena's superiors already with this information? Right? Who's her source? We'll get back to that. But why didn't she go to Lena's superiors already with this information if she wants the job so badly? Lena even points this out, asking why she is being personally blackmailed by Gwen when she's not particularly wealthy, especially when compared to Gwen's family, the Bouchards. An interesting thing to note, but we'll get back to that. And it's at that point that Gwen says she wants in. Vague statement. She doesn't clarify what in means in this situation. She just wants in on it. Of course, when Lena asks how Gwen has that kind of knowledge, Gwen, in typical Gwen fashion, doesn't give away her reason. But Lena says she's amused. She says she's thrown, but she thinks Gwen has demonstrated that she just might have a stronger stomach than she'd thought initially. She says, quote, "I have been needing someone to step up to the real work for quite some time now." And there and then, she appoints Gwen as the new externals liaison. When Gwen asks if this is a promotion, Lena clarifies that it kind of is, and then expresses her relatively high expectations, and that Gwen can consider herself in. And that's where the episode ends. Holy yeah, things are ramping up, right? Things are ramping up. If the last episode can be considered a just a very exciting episode, at least in my perspective, in terms of like execution with regards to world building and what's going on in the background, this one does a far greater has a far greater effect in with regards to utilizing its established lore to create some sort of setup for the future, especially with how much occurs and who reacts to what. Now, probably the best thing, it's hard to look at this and decide where to like pick the thread first, right? Which thread here should we follow? And I think the best one to start off with would probably be the incident itself. The incident itself is probably the least mysterious thing, right? It's the least mysterious thing that occurs this episode, simply because we could maybe kind of sort of pick it apart and see an inkling of what is the goal of the entities, but again, things aren't exactly so clear cut. So the best we can do, as always, is to just try to figure out what the heck is going on, right? So, regarding the incident, it's again filed the same day as last episode, which, doesn't really mean anything per se, but I just sort of found that to be interesting. I guess a lot of interesting things happened that day, Celia. But again, let's focus on the incident itself first. Now, according to the incident and the file report, it seems to have occurred 8 years prior to what has to this point in the story, taking place in, what was it, 2016? Yeah, 2016. Although I believe, according to the email, it occurred in 2015 in December. with the email itself being sent in February 2016. With regards to where it occurs, it seems to involve the Oxford People's Trust, which I guess I'm gonna be honest, I'm not too familiar with like how trusts work exactly, especially in this context. Uh, it would seem that OPT seems to draw some inspiration from the Oxford Trust, which is the real world equivalent, I guess, question mark, which seems to be a philanthropy sort of effort that is geared towards like building interest towards like the art, not maybe not the arts, but just like education in general. And so the taking of donations tracks on that front, but I feel like I might be missing the mark on that. If you can explain trust to me in a way that makes sense, then please, by all means, I would deeply appreciate that. Regarding what occurs and what's at stake here and what entity is at work and pulling the strings, it's kind of not hard to really see. This entire statement, this entire incident, absolutely reeks of the web. For those who need a refresher, the web is an entity that is a planner, right? It's a spanner in the works, all about the fear of being under someone else's control, the fear of unforeseen consequences, and yeah. Now, maybe that isn't clear, right? The fear of a loss of control. Diane briefly mentions it in her email with the quote, "I began to sense that I was starting to lose control of the situation." It's an email. It's not like she's describing her primal fear of the moment when she realized that, which was admittedly much early on in that series of events rather than like the culmination of it that resulted in the shop burning to the ground. But it's there, and it's hard to ignore. However, whereas the lack of control or the fear thereof is not so prevalent, or it's prevalent, but it's not so pointed in its presence here. Instead, the thing that gives away a connection to the web and nothing else is the fact that this occurs at a place known as the Hilltop Centre. The Hilltop Centre. That is a very, very important name for Magnus Archives because the house on Hilltop Road is basically the stronghold of the web. Well, of course, it's changed hands in terms of who has owned it, but that is something that is both important and not important. What matters is that the house on Hilltop Road, is the center of the web's actions. Everything goes back to Hilltop Road and the house therein, because that is, and this is going to be very important. This is a major spoiler, by the way, but that is where the gap in reality exists. It was first hinted of in, well, I mean, just so it's important at the end of the series, but it appears and is hinted at for 12 episodes of Magnus Archives. It was hinted that the gap in reality existed there at Hilltop Road in episode 114, Cracked Foundation, with a statement of Anya Villette. Anya Villette apparently was hired to clean out the house on Hilltop Road, but when she went in, when she cleaned up, she experienced like some spooky happenings. And then once she went into the basement, it really upped the ante. And upon leaving Hilltop, she found that she left several days earlier than when she went in. And as she explored the world around her, she came to realize that there was something way too off about the world that she was in. The people that she knew in life didn't recognize her. The people that she didn't recognize knew her. There were buildings and places that she doesn't remember them being, including the Magnus Institute when she gave her statement in the first place. That was the first hint of the gap in reality. Then it was mentioned in Magnus Archives episode 146 by the distortion as being a scar on reality, before eventually it's the full weight of its existence was explored and explained in episode 196, This Old House, wherein it's explained that for centuries the web guided avatars to conflict there on Hilltop Road at the gap in reality. Well, for centuries it was a crack, until eventually, of course, they were able to finally open it after having centuries upon centuries of different avatars coming to conflict in that specific area. It's important. To say that it's not important is a gross understatement, and to say that it's important is just as gross an understatement as possible. Everything hinges on the gap in reality in the end. And yet here we are, in an alternate reality, in the world of the Magnus Protocol, where a huge, huge event should occur at a place named oh so similarly, at the Hilltop Centre, a place where a bizarre volunteer with inklings, the slightest scent of a connection to the threads of the web, they say they are familiar with this area, that they know more about it than anyone. And what happens in this space? They end up bringing a bunch of relics and artifacts and donations to this space. Why don't we look at those donations, right? A false plant in a ceramic pot modeled on a shouting human face, a bearskin rug, chandelier of dark glass, oversized gramophone, with religious plain-song records, crudely carved rocking horse, grandfather clock leaking dark oil, vandalized set of Encyclopedia Britannica, book's always a bad thing, a collection of abstract canvas artworks. The list goes on. And it's hard to look at these as being normal. I mean, there's no real, I guess, rhyme or reason to why certain artifacts are attuned or marked by specific entities in the previous series. But we could hazard a guess. A false plant in a ceramic pot model on a shouting human face. Well, it's hard to say, but I guess you could make the argument that it's marked by the stranger, maybe marked by the spiral, a bearskin rug, stranger, chandelier of dark glass, dark, oversized gramophone with religious plain-song records. Okay, that's hard to really point out, but if we're going by religious themes, then it could reasonably be the flesh. It could reasonably be the vast, just based off of the size. Yeah, crudely carved rocking horse. Maybe stranger. Maybe with a rocking bit there. It could possibly be connected to the spiral or the vast, just by feeling of just rocking back and forth like that. I don't know. Grandfather clock leaking dark oil. Could be the dark. Could be time. Could be, the end. Oil. Could be desolation. Vandalized set of Encyclopedia Britannica. I don't know. Knowledge. Could be the eye. Collection of abstract canvas artworks. Spiral. Easy. Large soiled crinoline dresses. Buried, maybe, in the sense of usually that would be paired with a corset, wouldn't it? Maybe. I don't know. Chaise long with cushions of coarse sand. Buried, maybe. Taxidermied vulture. Stranger, rusty antique printing press. Okay, that one could stump me. But collection of old medical equipment that seemed to have been used. Corruption. Leather kite. Vast. Oddly curved brass telescope. Vast. Spiral. Eye. Take your pick. Wheelbarrow full of shifting fossils. Spiral. Stranger. Buried. The end, the extinction, armload of swords, slaughter. There's just so much there. You could argue that this incident technically has every entity represented and possibly every single possible blending of entities that could reasonably be conceived in a writing room in a single day. Who's to say? There's just a sheer an overwhelming volume of entities being represented here. And then it all comes to a head when all of it is there, and then it gets raided, right? An unknown security firm comes in, puts the whole thing to light, and wipes out all the bizarre beings laughing for the sake of a good cause. It's so out there, and yet it has echoes of what could be a repetition of what had occurred in archives, except it's just the slightest bit, I don't want to say forced, but that's the word that comes to mind when I look at this incident. When we talk about the gap in reality in archives, we talk about episode 196, This Old House, and how it's explained that the entire work of the web for centuries has been to prepare that place for the grand escape of the entities, or the grand ejection of the entities in the end, right? It is something that they build up to. They spent centuries trying to do, guiding their avatars of various entities to this one specific spot in order to get their conflict to absolutely break the crack into a gap. And it takes them forever to do it. They have so many different avatars fight each other in this space. Maybe not outright fight, but conflict, without a doubt, occurs in this area. The most significant one being between the Desolation and the Web. That ends up being the, I guess, last conflict that occurs there. The last conflict between avatars that turns the crack into a gap. But it took them centuries. The first time they mention it, right, is that it occurs at a point in time when the Anglo-Saxons, if I recall correctly, were present in England. That's how far back you have to go to see them. Even that's how far back they went when they first noticed it in this space. And that's how long it took them to finally break it open. But they were always subtle about it, you know? Well, presumably, it's the web. The web operates on subtlety and unforeseen consequences from the smallest of actions and decisions that you make. Here, it's not a conflict per se between two avatars. Instead, well, we don't know about the avatar situation. We'll get to that part in a second here, but here, there is just artifacts upon artifacts, donations upon donations of what are very clearly marked items and cursed objects of various entities all at once, condensed into a single specific point in the universe. And all of it is just like burned away. You know, their marks, I guess, disappearing with them, but it gives off this sense of just like the web trying to brute force it this time. It feels like they're trying, whereas in the past it was like they were trying to pick away at the crack bit by bit, little by little, at least based on their description of it. Here it seems like they went for the wrecking ball approach. This is loud. This is in your face. This is not something you can just easily ignore. They just straight up tried to have every entity there. And then for what purpose? Reasonably, one can assume that they're trying to do a repeat of what they did in archives and turn the gap into a crack immediately. But it feels counterintuitive to the web's modus operandi. I can't help but look at it and wonder if they were trying to speed run to the apocalypse and to the ejection, all at the same time, simply by having just this wide variety of entities present via their artifacts here in a way that could, I guess, in some meaningful way substitute someone else performing the ritual. Maybe they thought it could be done, that it would be possible. Is that an act of the web and I at the same time, wondering if this is possible, if it would be easier and better to just, instead of like take some poor schmuck and get him to do the ritual nonsense, maybe it would be better to just have all of it condensed into a single point and just all at once. That way they can kill two birds or 13 entities with one singular swoop. As I'm saying this, I'm starting to wonder, what if this is John's doing? What if this is John and Martin's doing at this point? Because, again, the web is a planner, right? And we've explored the possibility that maybe John is a little too connected to the entities at this point in time to really be separated from them ever at this point. Ever again. Same with Martin. Maybe, right? Maybe. We explored this with the episode Personal Screening. That was the name of it. 2 episodes ago, I think. Where maybe John was doing his spooky, I can see into your memories and I'll appear in your dreams sort of thing, except via movies. So maybe this could support the idea that he's too connected to the entities as is. And then in this instance, it kind of lends credence to the possibility of the eye being involved, right? And John wanting to experiment with trying to speed run into this solution as quickly as possible. It would be in character because the eye is all about, knowledge and seeing what happens and indulging your wild curiosity. Consequences be damned. And who cares if it's not quite on brand and in character for the web? It would, I guess, be on brand and in character for the eye to just wantonly, arbitrarily decide that this might be a solution. So, and we've talked about the possibility of the eye remembering exactly what happened in archives and trying to perhaps replicate it, maybe knowing better compared to its existence in archives, or maybe it's just experimenting as it does. Who's to say? It would be very interesting if that was the case. The web obviously would plan to use Hilltop again for its purposes, and clearly Hilltop is always at the very least, with regards to at least two dimensions, right, ends up being important. It would, you know, be 3 for 3 if it ended up being the case here as well. It would make sense for the web to seek out the exact same gap in reality as soon as possible, but it would be on brand for the eye to see if it's possible to try to break through it as quickly as possible as well. But again, who's to say? And in the end, we can't really conclusively say whether or not that it worked. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. As it turned out, the gap in reality was already turned into a gap in reality by the time John takes up his post as the archivist. So, for all we know, maybe it's already less of a crack and more of a gap at this point. We're just gonna have to wait until Hilltop makes an appearance again, and I'm almost certain that it will make another appearance, though in what context it'll be hard to determine. On that front, we get to the security firm that appeared. My question, as well as everyone else's, is who the heck is the security firm and what are they doing there? No name is mentioned. There is perhaps the possibility that this is Starkwell, right? The private military contractor, apparently associated famously or infamously, if you will, to some unknown event called the San Pedro Square Massacre. So already, not exactly a good look for them. So if they were involved in something so public as that, then who's to say that they weren't involved in something as so horrifically public as an entire museum, trust shop, whatever, burning down for everyone to see in conjunction with what can only be described as them gunning down, well, not exactly innocents, I guess, but it's hard to really say at this point. So already we know that this is a group inclined towards violence as an answer and question, and whose inevitable answer, of course, is yes, though probably within reason, maybe. So it could be Starkwell, maybe it's the OIAR response department. We still don't know if the response department of the OIAR is separate or the same as Starkwell, or who knows, maybe they are independent hunters, just sort of doing their own thing, doing their own business, and having their bit of fun in hunting down monsters and beasties. It's not like the hunt ever would have noted the fact that the world is better off with them fixing this, right? Or who knows? Maybe it would be on brand for the hunt to step in and prolong the achievement of a ritual or the achievement of getting ejected into another world. Maybe, who's to say? The fire is also kind of sort of indicative maybe of some people desolation aligned where they're trying to undo the hard work of the web. Maybe it would be a poetic parallel, and it's been demonstrated that at the very least Magnus Protocol will do a couple of parallels, especially with regards to, well, not especially, but in my suspicion, with the regards to usage of stranger elements in the earlier episodes, similar to archives as well. And who knows? At this point in time, any of these hypotheses, any of these guesses are equally likely to be true, and there's also the possibility that all of them are true, you know? All we know is that they are a quote unquote security firm, that they are a reasonable sort, given that they won't eliminate someone that they suspect or have every reason to believe is not connected to the entities. They probably know exactly what they're hunting, right? And they probably know exactly where their bullets need to go. The question is, who do they work for? Why do they do the work that they do? Or is it all just for money? And there's no grand scheme, no ulterior motive behind this security firm. We'll just have to wait. We'll just have to wait until another, I guess, massacre occurs. Although one does have to wonder why this massacre seems to have been swept under the rug so easily, and that a fire breaking out by accident is so easy for them to throw out, whereas the San Pedro incident seems to be common and widespread knowledge. Likely, it could be somewhere out in Spain. Maybe it's out in the Americas due to just by virtue of the name alone. I don't know. I don't know if I don't know if San Pedro Square is a place out in the UK, so I don't want to jump to conclusions on that front. Odd considering I've only been jumping to conclusions, so you'll just have to forgive me on that front. And that's where our analysis of the incident ends, and we're gonna have to take a step back and look at the OIAR as a whole. Now, that said, one little tidbit that I want to draw a little bit of attention to is that the incident was dictated by Freddy, in this case by Chester, in other words, by Johnny Sims. Which kind of, in some ways, goes against previous hypotheses, consider in that, suggest that John is used to dictate anything that has connections to the eye, right? And knowledge and wanting to know things such as that. This occurred in the first episode. With regards to the incident of Red Canary investigating the ruins of the Magnus Institute. This occurred with the incident regarding the film reviewer seeing a film titled Voyeur and seeing his memories displayed on the screen. In this instance, I kind of I've managed to point out that there is some aspects of the eye here that are potentially there, right? But it feels like this entire incident reeks of the web. This doesn't quite disprove the hypotheses just yet, because before John becomes associated with the eye, he was first marked by the web. And he has strong ties to the web, whether he likes it or not. While he does not act in the capacity similar to those empowered by the web, he is deeply connected to it, not least of which via Martin, who does demonstrate some aspects of the web. John is inextricably, that's the word, right? Connected to the web, and as I have demonstrated, there is some aspects of the eye here in the sense that maybe the eye is trying to see if they can just speed run the apocalypse. But again, that's just a hypothesis, and there's not much to support it just yet. After all, at this point, he has only appeared in 3 episodes. We'll have to see as this goes along. Stepping back from Freddy completely, we go ahead and look at the OIAR, and specifically its newest hire, Celia Ripley. Celia Ripley. Whew, okay. So, speaking of John, quite interesting that Celia should recognize John's voice. There's a lot of cheeky writing that occurs in this conversation between Celia and Alice. She notes, right, that it doesn't matter if she recognizes John's voice as being someone from radio. She just goes ahead and says that I'm sure it wasn't anyone important. Meanwhile, prior to that ending, that little tidbit, that little cheeky bit of deprecation, she mentions specifically looking for case files like things about being buried alive, meat, or flesh, if you will. It seems a little bizarre that she's getting a bit specific with her inquiries, isn't it? And she's asking similar questions to the audience. Are there any commonalities between the dictated ones? We've certainly seemed to notice it. Apparently, no one else in the OIAR has, but we certainly have made a note of it now, haven't we? And I mentioned this last episode. Celia has the same voice actor and name as a character that appears in archives. Specifically, she appears as what was her name? Lynn Hammond. That was her name. She appears as Lynn Hammond, the voice actress, Laurianne Davis. She appears as Lynn Hammond in episode 100 of Magnus Archives. I Guess You Had to Be There. Specifically, she is the statement giver that talks about, what was it? A ghost? Spiders? No, I think it was about a ghost that she saw, but it's the episode where everyone realizes they need John to be there, otherwise statement givers make zero sense and are absolutely incoherent. She then reappears in episode 190, Scavengers, recognized by Martin, except in this episode, she lost her name Lynn because she was trapped in a domain where one loses your identity. And instead, she took on a different name. Guess what name she took on? Celia. Now, it wouldn't be the first time a character, Martin, recognized her, right? As a statement giver. It seemed like an odd thing to include, right? It's very bizarre to include that she had taken on a new name, but it kind of paints Celia in a different light. Because Celia in this episode says that nothing much scares her anymore. She's not affected by fear in a way that she was in the past. And that should make sense, because if this Celia and Archive Celia are in fact the same person, then that means that this Celia has seen what a world with the entities wreaking havoc looks like. She has experienced it firsthand, fully and completely, to the point that she literally changed her identity. Of course, that raises a couple of questions, like, how are you here? Why are you in this world? And what is your end goal, right? She recognizes the voice of John. She has to recognize the voice of John. Who knows? Maybe it's the Celia of this world, right? Maybe it's a world where Lynn Hammond is just a completely normal person in this space. And instead, she is driven by some other purpose that has brought her into contact with John in some other form. Or maybe she knew the John of this world and she recognizes his voice here. It's creative thinking. It would suit the world established before us in maybe a loosey-goosey way, but it's possible. However, I doubt that. And I think a lot of people doubt that. Instead, we're just gonna have to wait and see. I hate it. I hate as much as anyone else that we have to wait to see what other suspicious things Celia does or says or asks about. But we're just gonna have to see, because it seems Celia is girl's playing with a full deck. And it feels like she can see everyone else's hand. So we're just going to have to wait until she shows her hand fully and completely. However, I do want to point out that with her search for whatever it is that she's searching for, I get the sinking suspicion that she is going to subtly come into conflict with Alice, who is doing her best to get Sam to drop his searching, his inquiries, and all of his investigations. Where Alice seems to be the super ego to Sam's ego, Celia might just be the id in this narrative. Especially given the fact that Sam apparently has something of a little crush on Celia. Whether or not she is going to exploit that, or if they're just gonna work together towards a common goal, or a yet unknown common goal. Who's to say? But the web works in mysterious ways, so odds are, if it is working towards something, and it always is, it'll find a way to make these two get what they want. If, indeed, it's something that it wants. Speaking of Sam, dude just name drops John. Actually name drops John. He gets an email from John. Apparently, no last name to speak of, but he gets an email from John. Is this actually John? Is this actually John? And why is John reaching out to Sam specifically? Where is the address that he sends him going to? Who is John trying to get Sam to talk to? I guess we're just gonna have to wait. But whoever it is, if it is John, if it's not, then it just goes to show that something outside of the office, or maybe something inside the office, is trying to pull some strings around here. And whoever it is, they definitely are not letting Lena in on the joke. Because Sam is getting stuff from John, security alerts are getting sent to Alice of all people, Gwen's getting a video recording of Lena apparently trying to kill someone and failing. Is the OIAR under attack by something? An information war? And they're getting caught flat-footed at this point? Is Celia a part of this? Celia, I think, Celia seems to be looking out for information. So, I don't know. I feel like maybe Celia is not connected in any way to whoever it is that is spying on the OIAR and giving them access to all this information. Because if it had access to all this information, then surely it would have given it to Celia, right? Right? Maybe? Well, in the meantime, I guess we're just gonna have to wait for John to drip feed more and more information to Sam. Now, is this like a web situation of something or someone or John leading Sam along, giving him just enough information to make him want more, to give him the cliffhangers that make him desire a closure? Or is this that just makes the most sense now, doesn't it? But then, again, what's the end goal here? Why Sam specifically? Unless Sam is somehow marked, like a certain other individual in a different universe was marked as being the catalyst, the one to change everything on its head? Is that what's going on here? Is this the web's doing? Is this an Elias Bouchard doing of just trying to nudge things in the right, possibly ideal situation? I guess we're just going to have to wait. Take a shot every time I've said that in this episode alone. If not every episode up to this point. I guess we'll just have to see. Speaking of Sam, I certainly hope that the struggle with Colin doesn't get too bad. But Colin, I get more and more concerned for every passing day. And, well, if he figures out the system, I wonder if we're going to be seeing Colin in a body bag anytime soon. Fingers crossed. I do like you, Colin. For what little scant appearances you get at this point, considering your paranoia, I do still like you. But I still don't have high hopes for you surviving to the end of this season, Colin. And I mean that only with the most sincere depth of concern. Speaking of Bouchards, Gwen. Let's talk about Gwen here. So, it seems that Gwen Bouchard is not a, I guess, red herring, per se. I don't know if that's the word that I want to use at this point in time. I did wonder if she was going to be a red herring. But at the very least, it seems that she does come from the same high status as Elias did, considering how Lena mentions that it would make no sense to blackmail her considering Gwen comes from a very wealthy family. This is, of course, like demonstrated in Magnus Archives episode 193, A Stern Look, where Elias talks about how he came from a well-to-do family. If his father's words are anything to go by, quote, "You have every advantage that I in this world could possibly provide." And quite similarly, Elias knew, right? Knew in quotations, he was destined for greatness and that he deserved better, that he was designed to be important, raised to be important, and that it was in his blood to succeed. And that as far as he was concerned, the place he applied to could have been anything. It's just that he felt that the Institute was the place he knew he should be. And here we have Gwen feeling like she deserves the position that Lena is in, to be in on something, to be in charge of something, to be in a position, I guess, of power. And here she is, finally leveraging things in her favor, and, well, who knows what it's going to lead to. Lena doesn't seem to be particularly impressed by her efforts to one-up her. And in fact, Lena still seems to have all the cards in her hands. Gwen has some cards in her hands. Obviously, she has the blackmail material. She has whatever her source is that gave her the information regarding Lena's misstep. And of course, there is the fact that she has a mysterious benefactor that is pulling strings everywhere in the office except in Lena's, backed in her corner to help Gwen succeed in something. But why, right? Why? We see that she doesn't care about the law, at least. She just wants to be in charge. But why? Elias's motivations is simply because hubris, pride, some misplaced sense of self-righteousness that carries on all throughout his tenure at the Institute, not even just his being in charge. What is Gwen's goal? And what is she trying to achieve at this point in time? It seems clear that she's willing to issue certain moral convictions, or moral conventions, rather, in order to come out on top, but still, she didn't cash in on that. She didn't cash in on the potential to be in charge. Instead, she decides to play a different game of chess and instead milk this information, this blackmail, for whatever it's worth. And now it's gotten her externals liaison. which we know that Lena has been meaning to fill as a role. And it becomes clear that this is what she meant by expanding external operations. The question is, what is that going to look like? Does that mean Gwen is going to come into contact with this so-called Starkwell? Or this unnamed security firm? Are they two separate entities, or entities with a lowercase e, or are they one and the same? And what is Gwen's work going to entail? Is she expected to do exactly what Lena was quote unquote doing, or rather supposed to do, in plugging up leaks with the case of Klaus? Is she going to be expected to hunt down Klaus? Especially considering she apparently has some reliable source that could give her information that Lena wonders how she's able to come upon in the first place. Is there some sort of internal politics and factions at work within the OIAR or in the government levels above Lena? And Lena is simply an actor on behalf of one faction, and Gwen has been designated as an actor for a different faction. In which case, wow, I don't know how to feel if they decided to add one of the most horrific things to come out of the modern world: office politics and political factions. Please, I beg of you, writers, Johnny, if you would, don't do it. You apologized in the previous series for getting too real, with one episode in particular. Please don't do it here. All joking aside, it will be very interesting to see how Lena and Gwen try to maneuver around each other. Narratively speaking, one could reasonably predict that Gwen eventually is going to come out on top on Lena. It'll be a very, very long road to get to that point, but even if Lena has all the cards in her hand, Gwen has a mysterious benefactor in her corner doing who knows what in the background, not just with her but with everyone else in the office. Lena's kept out of the loop, but then again, there is the point to be made in Lena's favor, which is, again, she has all the cards in her hand. She has a lot of knowledge at her fingertips, and she has people above her that are very well connected. And it should be noted that for all the information and maneuvering that is occurring in the background of the OIAR, behind the scenes, whoever is doing the spying, whoever is doing the information gathering, they're not able, or either they're not able, or they're specifically trying not to get information out of Lena. Everything seems to be tangentially related to Lena. There are instances, of course, where they're able to get information out of her directly. After all, they manage to, what's the word? They manage to eavesdrop, right? On conversations that occur in the office. But it's hard to say whether that is Freddy or whatever program is being used to access her office is it connecting via Lena's own equipment? Like her own computer or her own phone? Or is it getting that information via the equipment of those who go into the office? That is to say, when Sam goes in for his interview, is that, in the trailer, is that being recorded via his phone? Or is it being recorded via something that is present in Lena's office? When Gwen goes in, is it via Gwen's phone or is it Lena's phone? It seems like it feels like a narrative choice, obviously, from a dramatic irony, not dramatic irony point of view, but from a writer's point of view and from the audience point of view. It makes sense to make it so that we can't see everything. Sure, we're viewing this from the perspective of the program, but it makes sense that in order to preserve the mystery aspects and all that, to be very selective of what points in the story you want to present, what details you want to present as possible. Chekhov's guns, Chekhov's skills, what possible tidbits are going to be important to to the climax of any given season of the series as a whole. It makes sense to to conservatively dole out detail. But it feels like a very, very deliberate choice to present us with a program that has demonstrably has access to all forms of technology and media, including private emails, government court-ordered therapy sessions, internet forums, police calls, emergency services calls, letters, evidence like files, digitized historical accounts. It has access to all these forms of information and technology, and yet for some reason, it doesn't have access to Lena's own technology. Now, this can make sense, right? You could it makes sense within any given context of government work. Obviously, information should be under tighter wraps and much more firm security when compared to, say, local police departments. Potentially, I'm not a security and I'm not a security analyst. I'm not that kind. I don't have that kind of programming background at all. My programming experience is limited solely to MATLAB, which is an engineering programming language that literally no one actually uses except for the sole purpose of engineering school, as far as I can tell, and as far as I've been told. But it's so hard to ignore that despite that, this program that behaves on its own, that Colin himself feels like is acting antagonistically and of its own accord and doesn't seem to actually behave, and just on its own cuts in on random conversations everywhere. It can't peek in on whoever Lena is talking to. The security for surrounding Lena is so high that a program such as Freddy can't access it. Nobody knows how it works, but it can't. I don't know where I'm going with this. I just went on a very long tangent to basically say that Lena has the highest level of security, and that makes it so that her and everyone above her is absolutely untraceable by Freddy. I mean, good on them. It's great, I guess, that they are able to ensure that no information gets out at any point in time. So I guess that just leaves two possibilities if I'm to take a step back, calm down, and look at it. Either this Freddy is being used by an external entity that is not associated with the OIAR in any way, shape, or form, or at least directly, and it's being used to spy on the OIAR and try to guide things in a way that make it so that the department achieves something, maybe fails, who knows what the ulterior motive is, but whoever is using the program to spy on them, if they are indeed using the program to spy on them in the first place, they are external and they're not able to access that higher level of information, but they are trying to. That would explain why they are giving information to Gwen. Doesn't necessarily explain why they're giving information to Sam, but it will explain why they're trying to get Gwen into a position of higher power and authority within the OIAR. Another possibility that is I only really have a hunch about is that the OIAR and those in Lena's position and higher are spying on their own people? It only makes sense in the sense that, like, why would they spy on Lena when Lena's part of the inner circle and the inner circle's purpose is to spy on everyone else? Now, why they would want to do this, I don't know. It could be a security thing, as demonstrated by Lena actually being charged with killing Klaus. But then, if that's the case, why would this information be sent immediately to Gwen and therefore prompt Gwen not to find Klaus, not to promote Gwen, but instead drive her to blackmail Lena instead? If they are spying on the office and Lena is on the inner circle, then did Lena get the boot? If she got the boot, why isn't she being disappeared like Klaus was supposed to be disappeared? And who knows how many others have been disappeared by this inner circle. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's like, why would an eye need to watch itself? I don't know. It's hard to really see what's going on at this point in time because it feels like a deliberate narrative choice to not include Lena's perspective throughout the entirety of what has happened up to this point, with the sole exception of the instances where someone goes into her office. Maybe she doesn't take meetings that often from the rest of the office, but I just can't help but feel like there is a very explicit in-universe reason, besides high security and encryption, data encryption, that prevents that, like, we can't access that information, and that there is an external force at play here that wants something of the OIAR. Celia obviously wants something from the OIAR. What? Can't really seem to pin it down. We know that she wants information. We know that she wants to find perhaps specific incidents, but we don't know why, and we couldn't guess as to why. We know that she recognizes John's voice. We know that John is being used name-wise. The name is being used. Who knows? Maybe it's just a cover for something else, but they have made explicit efforts in trying to get Sam to look for more information. And we know that they want Gwen to be deeply involved in something. But again, we don't know why. We can unfortunately, only really guess as to the reasons. But whatever is being laid out in front of us, whatever is being set up, I mean, I would just love an answer to my questions, really. Is Starkwell related to the response department? Is John actually an external entity working behind the scenes to achieve some goal of sorts? Is the goal to give the entities the boot again? Did they just try to do that in this incident? Is there another gap in reality waiting to be torn open wholesale at the Hilltop Centre? I have my suspicions, and I am sure everyone else has their suspicions, but as always, we're just going to have to wait and see. In the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and make a note of these hypotheses and my predictions and questions. And I implore everyone else to keep track of what's going on as well, because this is turning out to be this roller coaster is turning out to have a lot more loops in it than I had initially suspected. Should have known better, but I'm looking forward to the part where everything goes downhill. But with that being said, guys, we're going to go ahead and call that an episode. A bit longer this time around. There was a lot to talk about, but I'm feeling pretty satisfied, even if my thoughts were perhaps just a little bit more hectic compared to previous episodes. In any case, I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you have theories, if you have guesses and predictions that you would like to share for those of you watching the VOD, by all means, put them in the comments section. And yeah, if you like what you see, drop a follow, drop a like, a subscribe for those watching the VODs, and yeah, thank you so much for popping in, hanging out, and being your beautiful selves. I hope you all have a fantastic morning, afternoon, evening, whatever the time is in your neck of the woods. And with that being said, shop's closed. Get out. Bye-bye.